Hi everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions and Happy New Year. Thank you so much for watching and thank you for all your support. 2024 is going to mark 10 years of me doing this at the end of August. It will be a full 10 years since I've been doing this, and I wouldn't do it if there was no audience, so thank you all for your support. On this episode, I'm going to do something that is quite different than anything I've done before because I've done lots of year-end episodes, and people seem to like those. Lots of countdown episodes by the year, but I usually have 2 or 3 other co-hosts with me. On this episode, I'm going to be counting down my picks for the top 30 albums that came out 40 years ago in 1984. Now, some of you may be thinking, but I like it when you have other people on here and you have different opinions. Don't worry, because usually, or typically, we do these at the end of the year. At the end of this year, there will be another 1984 episode, believe me, and it'll be more of a normal one. Now, I'll just sit back and be the host for that. But 1984, I think, and a lot of people I've talked to seem to agree, was probably the best year of the 80s for music. One of the best years ever in all genres of music. It was just a peak year. There was so much great music produced in that year. And it's the only year I think that I can come up with 30 albums that I think are worth talking about for one year. So I thought I'd kick the year off by counting down my top 30 albums from 1984. And like I said, we'll do a regular, top 10 with a panel later on in the year. But for this one, I'd like to kick the new year off looking back at one of the best years in music. And I remember 1984, I was 9 going on 10, and towards the end of the year is when I really started listening to the Top 40 radio and paying attention to music and paying attention to, what artists sang what songs, and it was a really, really pivotal year. So songs from this time period are very nostalgic for me. Some of these albums I discovered later, some of them I remember from when they were current. Now, I wasn't buying music on my own at this point, but I was very close to doing so. But in that spirit, everything I'm going to talk about today on this episode is on cassette. So let's get started. Number 30, a debut album. There are a few debuts this year. Great White, and their first full-length album on EMI, and this is a Canadian cassette. Great White, of course, became better known starting in 87 with their album Once Bitten. That had Rock Me and Save Your Love and Lady Red Light, and then, of course, Twice Shy in 89, which had Once Been, Twice Shy, Angel's Song, House of Broken Love, a couple platinum albums. This album's actually really heavy. It's not bluesy like their later stuff. Really good stuff on here. Hard to find on CD. I actually don't have it on CD. I only have it on cassette and vinyl. But that's my number 30, first album from Great White. At number 29, my good buddy Matt Phillips is going to cringe that this is solo, but I am including it. It's a band I like. It's just not one of my favorite albums by them. It's INXS and The Swing. Peter Kerr's probably cursing me out at this point too. This was, I think, a really big album for them in their native Australia. Now, I like the singles that came off of this album more than anything, particularly Melting in the Sun. This also had I Send a Message, and probably the best known song is Original Sin. The title song's fun too. This is not one of my favorite INXS albums. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's my number 29 for 1984. Number 28, Foreigner and Agent Provocateur continuing their run of really bad album covers. This was a platinum album for them. It had 2 big hit singles. Of course, I Want to Know What Love Is was a worldwide smash, and played on various formats. I don't think there's any guitar in it whatsoever, but everybody knows the song. And the second single, and a song that I still really like, is That Was Yesterday. I love Lou Graham's vocal on it. I mean, there's some rockers on this, though. The opening track, Tooth and Nail, no relation to another song of that name, which we're going to talk about. Reaction to Action was another rocker. That was actually a single, but it didn't do very well. And Stranger in My Own House is a good one. It's a very, very slick album, but enough, it's decent, right? It's decent, and there's more to it than just those 2 hit singles, so I wanted to include it. Next up is REO Speedwagon, Wheels Are Turning. This is a fairly popular cassette. I used to see this in a lot of collections. It was a multi-platinum album, but it doesn't have the resonance as High Infidelity did, although it did have 4 singles off of it. The biggest one, of course, being Can't Fight This Feeling. Yeah, it's probably one of the best power ballads. But I also really like One Lonely Night. That's sort of an acoustic-based mid-tempo. Live Every Moment is a fun pop song, and I Don't Want to Know was the first single off it, which is kind of a shuffle. But, you know, overall the album, not quite as good as the singles, but, you know, good enough to end up on this list. And the singles are strong enough to make sure it ended up on the list too. Number 26, this might seem low, but I do like it. It's just very, very out there. It's the debut from Steve Vai, who I got to see last year in concert. He didn't do anything from this album. No, he didn't do anything from this album. Flexible. And this originally came out in '84. This is a reissue from 1990 on Sony in Canada. So it was distributed by Relativity. And this is a very quirky album. This album follows very much in the footsteps of, you know, Steve just coming out of Frank Zappa's band. So it's way out there. It's very quirky. A lot of Steve stuff is quirky, but this one's really quirky. Very low budget. Steve basically did it and paid for it himself. But, you know, it's fun to listen to if you're in the mood for that kind of thing. It's got like Little Green Man and Salamanders in the Sun. Best known song on here is probably the Attitude song. That was one that got a lot of attention in guitar circles. But yeah, nobody composes like this guy. Nobody plays like this guy. But yeah, his debut, the debut from Steve Vai, Flexible, number 26. At number 25, a solo debut from one of the biggest rock bands. Well, they're still well known today. He's not in the band anymore, but their music is still well known, and they're still out on the road putting out music. Journey, of course. So Steve Perry's debut, Street Talk, came out in '84. Had a big hit single right off the top with O'Sherry. Still love the song, don't get tired of it. Second single, second best known song, Foolish Heart. Might be my favorite Steve Perry vocal performance. It's mellow, it's as adult contemporary as he gets, but I've always loved it. He just sings so well on that song. It actually had 4 top 40 singles, so it had that too. It also had Strung Out, and had another song that I really like called She's Mine. It's poppier than Journey overall. It's got more R&B on it. It really pointed the way towards the album that would become Raised on Radio. Other than those singles, the other song that I really like on here is Captured by the Moment. That's a good one too. It's not my favorite. You know, it's not good all the way through, I don't think, but it's worth a mention. At number 24, the first full-length album from Seattle's Queensryche, The Warning, on EMI America. This got a lot of people talking about this band. It eventually went gold on the strength of the albums that came later. This has Take Hold of the Flame, Warning, and Force. Still very heavy at this point, but some of those progressive leanings are coming in on songs like Roads to Madness. It's not one I listen to all the time, but I wanted to mention it. So yeah, a lot of buzz around this band at the time. Queensryche, The Warning. One of the biggest hard rock metal albums of the 80s and definitely of 1984. Really when music videos were, you know, reaching a peak of popularity. A lot of people I know had this album. Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry on Atlantic. Of course, this had their signature song, We're Not Gonna Take It. Also had I Wanna Rock. It's not my favorite Twisted Sister album, but there's some really heavy stuff on here like The Beast, Burn in Hell, SMF. I always like the ballad The Price. That's on here. So that's the next one. Number 22. My favorite Avatar band, whatever they're doing now. Kiss and Animalize. And this was a platinum album. It was their first platinum album in 5 years. It's just not one that I like all the way through, but there are some great songs on it. Of course, Heaven's on Fire was the big hit single off this one. I like Thrills in the Night too. I've never understood the drum production on that album. I don't like the production on this album at all. It's really wet and messy. I love the first track, really heavy. I've Had Enough, Into the Fire. This has some of Gene Simmons' worst lyrics ever. And some of Paul Stanley's aren't that good either. It's not my favorite album, certainly, and that's why it's down here. But it is on the list because I do like some of the songs on it. Number 21 for 1984. On a sad note, one of my rock and roll heroes passed away within the last month, Miles Goodwin of April Wine. Animal Grace was their album for 1984. One of the first songs I ever heard from them was the opening track, This Could Be the Right One. Should have been a bigger hit than it was. Really weird video, but a great song. Sons of the Pioneers is fantastic. Without Your Love. Did a whole series on April Wine on Grant's Rock Warehouse. Highly recommend you check that out. There's not much more I can add to it. This album is peaks and valleys, but I wanted to include it, talk about it. So now we're into the top 20, and a band that was making a huge comeback in 1984. Of course, that was lost on me at the time. I got into the band way later. Deep Purple, the Mark II lineup, reunited for Perfect Strangers. And this is a really, really good album. I mean, right off the bat, it's got two Purple classics with Knocking at Your Back Door and the title song, but Under the Gun is amazing. Nobody's Home is great. Mean Streak, Hungry Days. If you got the cassette or the CD, you got the song Not Responsible. But yeah, a good comeback album, and it went platinum, and deservedly so. This is a really, really strong album from Purple. At number 19, a guy that we're going to mention twice, in a way, for various reasons. This is kind of an album that got lost. It wasn't promoted all that much, and I think it's because the record company didn't want to spend that much money promoting, because it was a one-off. This was an album that was recorded live with new material, and then it was kind of doctored up in the studio. This is Hagar, Schoen, Aronson, and Shreve, Through the Fire, HSAS. So, of course, it's Sammy Hagar, Neil Schon, Kenny Aronson, and Michael Shreve. So a super group of sorts. They only did the one album. There are more songs that they did that didn't make this album. I'd like to see a deluxe version of this someday. My favorite songs on this have always been the first two tracks, Top of the Rock and Missing You. Missing You, Sammy should have saved that for one of his solo albums because it could have been a hit. The single off of this was a really good cover of Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale. They do the full-on power ballad version of it, and of course Sammy sings it so well. It's great. Not the easiest thing to find these days, but worth it. I file it under Sammy Hagar. I mean, you know, because in so many ways it just was the next Sammy album, but wouldn't be the last we heard from him in 1984. Number 18, the first full-length album from Kim Mitchell after leaving Max Webster, and then after doing an incredible solo EP in 82, Akimbo Logo, which came out in two different covers. This is the blue cover, the silhouette. This has some of his best-known songs on it. Of course, Go for Soda, one of his only songs that got any airplay in the U.S. It's got That's a Man. It's got All We Are, Lager and Ale. This whole album is fantastic. Diary of Rock and Roll Man, Diary for Rock and Roll Man, I guess. Rumor Has It, Called Off, Caroline. I love this entire album. This entire album is amazingly good. Number 18. All right, so my number 17 for 1984 is the second album from Dokken, Tooth and Nail. If you got this on vinyl or CD, it looks way different. This is more of what's on the inner sleeve, but it's just half. And of course, this was a platinum album. The title song was a really, really fast one. Really good showcase for George Lynch. Just Got Lucky, Into the Fire, but mostly the power ballad, Alone Again, all got airplay, all had fairly successful videos. Great album. The only drawback of this album is Tom Werman's production. There's never any bass. I'd say Stay Hungry suffers from the same thing. It's not a lot of bass in it, but great songs. So that's what really matters. And once again, at number 16, we're going to be hearing from the Red Rocker, Sammy Hagar. Here he is, it's just possibly his most patriotic, parachuting into the White House to help him out with VOA, Voice of America. And of course, this has his signature solo song, I Can't Drive 55. Two Sides of Love was another top 40 single off of this one. One of my favorites on this album is Swept Away. That's a really cool song. I don't like all the songs on this album. Dick in the Dirt's kind of silly, but this was a platinum album for him. After many, many years of struggling, he finally had a platinum album, and then what happens? He gets tapped to join another band. We'll talk about that later. So there you go. That was his second album that he put out in '84, both on Geffen. Some classic Canadian heavy rock here. This is another album that a lot of us that grew up in the '80s grew up with this album, Helix, Walking the Razor's Edge. It was their second major label album. It was their fourth album overall on Capitol. This had their signature song, Rock You. It also had their great cover of A Foot in Cold Water's Make Me Do Anything You Want. It also had Gimme Gimme Good Lovin'. But this whole album is great. Young and Reckless, When the Hammer Falls, Six Strings, Nine Lives, You Keep Me Rockin'. This is a great, great, great Helix album. Next up, earlier in previously, my buddy Chris Preston and I did an in-depth cassette look at this band. It's one of his favorites. This is Survivor and their 1984 album Vital Signs. This was a big album that I'm surprised this doesn't get mentioned more often as the greatest like melodic rock albums of the 80s, because this had big hit singles off it. I Can't Hold Back, High on You, The Search Is Over. Whole album is good. Popular Girl, Everlasting, Broken Promises. This is a killer album. Comes highly recommended. Another one of my favorite Canadian bands that are finally putting out a new album this year. The album's called Alive. But back in '84, they were a brand new band with a debut. This is Honeymoon Suite and their self-titled first album on Warner Brothers. 4 big hits off this album, and they lead this album off. New Girl Now, Burning in Love, Wave Babies, and Stay in the Light. But I love this whole album. Funny Business, Heart on Fire, Turn My Head. Yeah. This was the beginning of one of the best melodic rock catalogs right here. At number 12, it was their first big album in North America, but I think it was their 8th album overall. Whitesnake with Slide It In, David Coverdale with the revamped Whitesnake lineup, one of many revamps he would do. Title song, of course, Slow and Easy, big single and video. Probably my favorite Whitesnake song ever, Love Ain't No Stranger. Guilty of Love is a fantastic poppy rock song. This is a great album. Gambler is so, so good. Give Me More Time. Yeah, there's a reason this album went many times platinum. Set the stage for the 1987 album, but in a lot of ways, I think this is the better one. At number 11, can't go wrong with some Rat and Roll. First full-length album from Rat. They came up with an excellent EP in '83, and in '84 they were out of the cellar. Tawny Kitaen, the late Tawny Kitaen on the cover there. This was a huge album, Round and Round. It was the staple song. I still love it. I never get tired of it. Still gets a lot of airplay today, deservedly so. Wanted Man, Lack of Communication, Back for More. This just has one banger after another. This album is so good. You can, and fortunately, you can. It's still easy to find. So if you don't have it, go get it. Go get out of the cellar. So now we're into the top 10. This is one of the first hard rock albums I ever bought. I don't think I bought it till '87, but I know this album inside out. This is Triumph and Thunder 7. Love this album. It's produced by Eddie Kramer. This is their first album that came out at MCA as a new release. Follow Your Heart and Spellbound were the singles and videos off of this. Always been such a fan of this album. Always been my favorite Triumph album. So that's my number 10, into the top 10 now. Number 9 is a band I didn't get into until much later, and I still think it's one of their best. Metallica, Ride the Lightning, their second album. This is the Elektra version. And, I mean, what can I say about this album? For Whom the Bell Tolls, Creeping Death, Fade to Black. You know, they still play most of this album in concert at one time or another. At number 8, switching gears slightly, a little more melodic. My favorite album from Toto, Isolation. It's the only album that Fergie Frederiksen sang on, although he didn't sing all the songs on here. It's got one of my favorite Toto songs with Stranger in Town. It's got some great ballads on here like How Does It Feel? The song Isolation is a great sort of melodic rock song. So is Endless. So is Angel Don't Cry. This is a good album all the way through. If you like melodic rock, get it. It's really good. Let's see. Next up. Love talking about this album because I discovered this album after buying their third album, which was called The Final Countdown. I was very happy to discover this album because I used to think The Final Countdown was the first Europe album. This is Wings of Tomorrow, the second Europe album from '84 on Epic Records. Did a Contrarians discussion on this album. I love Storm Wind, Scream of Anger, Treated Bad Again, the instrumental Aphasia. Open Your Heart was a great pop song on here. They redid it for Out of This World. I like both versions, so I don't really pick a favorite, but great guitar work from John Norum, and just a great, great album, which didn't get enough traction in North America. It deserves another look. At number 6, the year and the album, Van Halen, 1984. course, this was the last one with Dave for many years. They went out with a bang. #1 song, Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher, I'll Wait. This whole album is good. This album is short, but everything on it is good. Drop Dead Legs, Top Jimmy, House of Pain. Awesome, awesome album. Now we move into the top 5, and this album is one that I remember when it came out, and I've been a fan of it ever since. And I want to thank Bug Campbell for finding this United Arab Emirates version of Bryan Adams' Reckless. Of course, this isn't official. It's an A&M release, but yeah, this is an interesting version of that. But of the 10 songs on this album, 6 of them were hits, so it's getting into that era of just blockbuster albums. A lot of his signature songs came off of here. So there was Run to You, and Somebody, Heaven, Summer '69, One Night Love Affair, and It's Only Love with Tina Turner. It's also good Kids Wanna Rock. The songs are all in mixed up order on here. This is a counterfeit tape, but it's kind of fun. So there you go. #4. Love this album. Queen, The Works. This was considered quite a comeback after Hot Space, which was very pop, very R&B, very dancey. Radio Gaga was a big hit off of this one, and it's very pop, very dancey, but there are some rockers on here like Hammer to Fall, Machines, Back to Humans, Tear It Up. Those are all the Brian May supplied ones. It's also got I Want to Break Free, which is one of their best songs ever. It's a Hard Life, great ballad, Keep Passing the Open Windows. Yeah. This is one of the first albums I heard all the way through when I first got into Queen, and it's always been one of my favorites. This is a Canadian version on Capitol Records. All right, now we're into the heavy hitters. #3, you should know that this band would be on here. This is Rush, Grace Under Pressure. This is the US version on Mercury. Love this album. Distant Early Warning, After Image, Red Sector A, Body Electric, Kid Gloves. It's all good. Very Cold War influenced lyrically, but just another good Rush album. And #2, the debut album from one of the most important bands to me musically, and I love this album from start to finish. I don't think it gets enough attention. The debut album from Bon Jovi. Came out January 1984. Runaway, still one of my favorite Bon Jovi songs ever, but this whole album is good. Roulette, Breakout, Burning for Love. It's all good stuff. Even if you hate, you think you hate Bon Jovi, but you like 80s hard rock, this album might surprise you at kind of how rocking it is. It's poppy. It's got keyboards, but it's pretty tough sounding. And for a debut album, it's really, really accomplished. That's my #2. And #1, if you're paying attention, you already know what it is. The most successful album that this band put out. Y&T and Rock We Trust. This is a Canadian version on A&M. This was Y&T's most successful album. Nearly went gold. If it was audited, might certify today. They said Don't Stop Running, one of their best songs, one of their best known songs, Lipstick and Leather, Rock and Roll's Gonna Save the World, on and on and on. This album should have been bigger than it was, but it did sell okay, and it's the album you're most likely to come across if you're crate digging. My #1 album for 1984. There you go. That's my top 30 albums for 1984. I do want to mention, too, that if you're a fan of Y&T and you haven't heard about it yet, I have this book, Down for the Count, the Y&T album review. Highly recommend that you pick it up if you're a Y&T fan. I'm not just saying that because a lot of the content in here is supplied by the panelists. I just asked the questions. Beautiful cover art by Hugh Syme. You just saw his artwork on the Rush album. Very proud of how this came out. Very glad with how it's selling. Available on Amazon. But yeah, Y&T #1 for 1984. A fantastic year in music. What were some of your favorite albums from 1984? And again, don't worry, there will be another Best of 1984 episode later this year. I just wanted to do all these 30 and give you my opinions on what I thought the best albums from an awesome year were. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And once again, have a happy New Year. We'll see you later.